taken from the original press release that was written, that none of the media would print all of this information, of course, but a couple of things that follow on to what they were just saying. In 1979, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration deleted 2 paragraphs of the Federal Register that classified fluoride as an essential or probably essential item for human consumption. That says something to me. Furthermore, and that is cited here on this piece of paper where you can find that. Furthermore, there was a major study, 2006, a scientific review of EPA standards by the Committee on Fluoride in Drinking Water of the National Research Council of the National Academies. 26 scientists, I believe, top of their field, were the ones that did this review. When you look at the recommendations area at the bottom of each category, which includes the 7 physiological systems of the human body, endocrine, skeletal, etc., etc. When you look at those recommendations, every one of them either says it's not entirely indicated, or at the very least says, we don't know enough. So when she's saying, you know, we used to be told, smoke your cigarettes and all of this, you know, we're in the process of still finding out about fluoride, and there are conflicting studies. So it's a matter of time, but I think we can be a little ahead of the curve, and again, that link is given here to that study, so you can take a look for yourself and see what those esteemed scientists had to say about it as well. So next on the venue is the esteemed Dr. Paul Connett. He is a graduate of Cambridge University and holds a Ph.D. in chemistry from Dartmouth College. How long did you teach?
From 83 to 2006.
Okay, so you were there quite a while at St. Lawrence University, and was one of the folks that, and there were a couple other folks here in the audience that were very much responsible as well for helping to remove the fluoride from Canton in 2003, I believe that was, right?
Yep.
So it has been done here locally. It can be done, and Mr. Connett has quite a few things to tell you about that, so we'll just let him get on with it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you, Mrs. Mayor and Lynn, for coming all the way up from Walden. This is very emotional for me. This is certainly like coming home. As you've said, I lived in the area for about 30 years. We were always coming to Potsdam. And anyway, the title of my talk is not what was publicized. The risks to the brain far outweigh any benefit to the teeth. I'm going to take essentially one issue. I may have time for a few more common sense arguments at the end, but some of those have already been tackled. But I want to take one issue, and that is the issue of whether fluoride damages the brain. And I'm going to tackle this in a rather personal way. I'm going to go through my 22 years of involvement fighting fluoridation with the milestones in the progress of the scientific evidence that fluoride damages the brain. It was emerging when I got involved in 1996, and it's come to almost incredible climax, the evidence. Anyway, so that's what I should be doing. I'm the director of the Fluoride Action Network. This was formed in 2000. I was director until 2015, and again reappointed in 2018. And as you know, I've taught chemistry at St. Lawrence from 83 to 2006. I specialized in environmental chemistry and toxicology. I think it was in June of 1996, my wife asked me to review the literature on the fluoridation debate. Actually, she came along and put a cup of tea on my desk and said, "Dear, would you read these?" And I should have been suspicious with the cup of tea. And I said, "What is it?" She said, "Fluoridation." I said, "Take that away, these people are crazy." I mean, and that is the prevailing attitude. It's contrived that people opposed to fluoridation are flaky, Looney Tunes, etc. Anyway, she did persuade me to read what she put on my desk. Here, by the way, is a picture of Ellen and my son, Michael. How many of you have met Michael? Mike, good, because Michael probably will be the most instrumental in ending fluoridation next year. I can tell you a little bit about the court case at the end. We're taking the EPA to court on this. I can give you the details. I think we're going to win that case in August of 2019. So he's very important to this issue. And of course, so is Ellen, who's the rock on which the whole Fluoride Action Network revolves. She does the bookkeeping, she's treasurer, she keeps the web page going, she tracks the latest news, she worries about everything, she makes sure I don't walk away from the issue. I would have walked away many years ago. One of the first pieces of information she shared with me was how low fluoride was in mother's milk. And that didn't make sense to me. Why would, if fluoride was needed for the baby's teeth, why would it be so low in baby's first meal? Now I believe that mother's milk is actually protecting our babies from early exposure to fluoride. Fluoride is very toxic, no question about that. And by having it low in mother's milk, the baby's tissues are protected. Here's the level, as according to the National Research Council, 0.004 parts per million. And of course, this also means that water fluoridation removes that protection when babies are bottle fed. The range of fluoride used in the United States is between 0.7 and 1.2 parts per million. If you remember that level in mother's milk, 0.004, that means that bottle fed babies in this country are getting with between 175 and 300 times more fluoride than they would get from mother's breast milk, or if you like, 175 to 300 times more than nature thought was appropriate for the newborn baby. And here this is nice because this man is about to echo what you heard from the mayor. This man is Arvid Carlson. He died a few weeks ago at the age of 95. He led the fight against fluoridation in Sweden. And he asked this question. He says, one wonders what an increase in the exposure to fluoride such as occurs in bottle-fed infants may mean for the development of the brain and the other organs. That was 1978. That was 10, 15 years before the first studies on IQ were published. Now, I have a question for you. I wish this was about science. I wish this was about science. I wish this was a scientific debate. The other people have the guts to come and debate me, but they very seldom would. I would love to this be to resolve scientifically. Unfortunately, it isn't. It's an issue that's spun with public relations, with politics, with power, and it's more about psychology. It's more about psychology. So I can go through all the science that I've studied, and people will say at the end of the day, well, do you trust him? Do you believe him? When the CDC says this fluoridation is one of the top 10 public health achievements of 20, who is Connett? In other words, they're not looking at the science, they're looking at the playing around with that public relations, the spinning, the massaging. So I want to ask you, here's a question. If I could really convince you, if I could, because I want to know what grounds we're on, if I could convince you that there's a high chance, a high probability that the IQ of your children are going to be lowered if pregnant women drink fluoridated water. If I could convince you of that was a high probability, not a certainty, but a high probability, would that lead you to say we mustn't do this? Or could you live with that? Could some dentist come along tomorrow and say, yeah, but it saves 2/10 of a tooth? Would that persuade you that it was okay? For me, you see, it's quite absolute. You should not be lowering the IQ of your children by something you put in the drinking water. Absolute. So don't tell me, Mr. Dentist, that this is going to do something for their teeth. That, to me, is not acceptable. Is that the same with you? That if I could show that, and it's a big if, it's a big challenge to me, if I can convince you that it actually does lower IQ, then we would not support this practice. Okay, well that's something for you to think about. That's the challenge that I have. And now the personal stuff, because this issue, I've actually just said that, no need to say it again. So I'm now going to go through my personal timeline, which kind of coincides with the history of this particular issue, the science of this issue. So When I got involved in '96, it coincided with the first 2 Chinese IQ studies published in English. There they are, and if anybody wants to get the details of that, you can have a copy of my whole PowerPoint afterwards. So the first 2 studies came out in '96. At the time, we wrote, this is my wife and I, Ellen at the time was putting out this newsletter. It was called Waste Not. And we wrote this together in November of 1996. And historically, this is very interesting. I would like this back. It is a historical document. But that's what we wrote in '96. And here specifically, we wrote, while it's conceivable that there may be confounding variables at work here, for example, there may be high levels of lead in the drinking water, the same drinking water that the fluoride was in. The implications of these studies, especially in conjunction with animal studies, and there were a number of animal studies published at that time, are so serious that they represent, in our view, another important red flag on the further use of fluoride in drinking water until the matter is resolved. Which is more important, our children's teeth or their brains? And that, as I said, the fluoridation of drinking water, a house of cards waiting to fall, November of 1996. In October of 2003, I was thrilled when I was the only scientist invited to give oral testimony, 45 minutes, to the National Research Council. And that was probably the most important presentation I've given in this whole 22 years of involvement, because it was in front of a panel not of 26, it was 12, the cherry, 12. But the important point about this panel is they were represented both sides. They had 3 anti, 3 pro, and 6 undeclared. So it was a balanced panel. They thought they were going to take a year reviewing this. It took them 3.5 years. And they produced a 500-page document which has become the sort of the Bible of toxicology on fluoride. So in my presentation to them on October 2003, I raised the issue of fluoride's neurotoxicity, its potential to damage the brain, and potential to lower IQ. Here's the report when it came out. It's available online for free. You can search it online. And this is what they concluded. It is apparent that fluorides have the ability to interfere with the functions of the brain. So here are these 12 balanced panel has the potential to interfere with the brain, have the ability to interfere with the functions of the brain. Now, they, at that time, only had 5 IQ studies. 5 IQ studies. And let me jump forward. We now have 60. Okay. At that time, they had 5. And one of those studies was by a Chinese researcher called Zhang, who works for the Chinese Center of Disease Control. The American Center of Disease Control Oral Health Division promotes fluoridation. The Center of Disease Control in China is trying to get fluoride out of the drinking water because it's doing so much damage, particularly to the bones of the Chinese people in many areas. In 2004, Zhang invited me to visit the 2 villages in China where these studies were conducted. And this was a very important study, and I'll share you with the details with you now. So he compared the IQ of children in 2 villages. The low fluoride village had an average fluoride in their well water of 0.36. Remember, we fluoridate between 0.7 and 1.2. And the high fluoride village was 2.5. So if you like, it bracketed what we have, 0.7 to 1.2. And he controlled for lead, which is one of our concerns, for iodine, and retrospectively for arsenic. So a well-done study. And he found a drop of 5 to 10 IQ points across the whole age range. And here you see how the IQ, this is for males, but the same for the females, the IQ, the black curve, is the low fluoride village, and you can see that the IQ curve has been shifted downwards. The IQ is along the bottom. And this means you've got fewer very bright children, which are around here. You see the magenta lines down, and you've got more mentally handicapped, an IQ less than 70, over there. So, continuing with this, he did something that many of the other studies did not do. He subdivided the high fluoride village into 5 groups, A, B, C, D, and E, and these 5 groups were divided into ascending concentration, fluoride concentrations. So we went from 0.75 to 1.5, 2.4, 3.28, and 4.16. So those are this is fluoride in the well water. This is natural fluoride. Now look at what happens to the IQ, the average IQ in those groups. As you can see there, as the fluoride water concentration goes up in these groups, the IQ goes down, 99.56, 95, 92, 89, 78. That is what we call a dose response, and you can plot it on a graph. As the water fluoridation went up, the IQ of the children went down. Now, from this graph, you can say it definitely went down. The IQ went down between these two values. This is 0.75, and this is 1.5. So somewhere there, the IQ went down. So that's pretty low. Pretty low. I'll spell it out here. The data would suggest IQ is low, somewhere between 0.75 and 1.5. And again, remember we fluoridate 0.7 and 1.2. But it's actually worse than that, because it turns out, as far as comparing with the United States, it turns out that these children did not use fluoridated toothpaste. So some of our kids would be getting more fluoride than these Chinese children. And secondly, these are rural Chinese villages, they don't bottle feed their baby. Most women there do not bottle feed. It's all natural breastfeeding. And so those babies would not have been getting fluoride from bottle feeding. So this is not good news for children in the United States. Now, in 2010, we published a book. One of the best decisions I made was to invite James Beck, a professor of physics at the University of Calgary, and also an MD, and Professor Spenny Micklem in Scotland, a Ph.D. from Oxford, biologist. So we had a retired professor of chemistry, retired professor of physics, retired professor of biology, getting together to write this book. And they were so good because they absolutely insisted that this book, we don't overstate, we don't exaggerate. I tend to fight a little, a street fighter, really. But they're not. No, they're very cool, calm, and collected, and made sure I was behaving properly. I didn't overstate anything. And everything had to be references. Everything had to be references. There are 80 pages of references to the scientific literature. We hoped this would raise the level of debate, that they would come back and say we were right here and wrong there, and we would. No, that hasn't happened. Essentially, they've done with our book what they do with any evidence that this is not a good idea, and they just ignore it. By 2010, again with our timeline, now the number of IQ studies are up to 23. And the reason it's up to 23 is that Michael realized a lot of the good stuff was being done in China. And so we got a lot of studies that were done in Chinese translated into English. This was a very important service. It turns out that later reviews have used our translation. But hitherto then, many Western researchers were unaware of this huge amount of Chinese work. And everything is referenced in our book. I did bring 3 or 4 copies of the book, that they're outside. If anybody did you get rid of them all?
They're on the
But they're still up there. You can get them at a reduced price. I don't get a royalty. It goes all the way into the Fluoridation Network. In 2012, a team from Harvard, including Philippe Grandjean, who's one of the world's authorities on mercury's neurotoxicity, published a meta-analysis of 27 IQ studies. They took 27 studies which had a similar structure to them. They compared the IQ of children in high fluoride villages with the IQ of children in low fluoride villages. Just like Zhang, in most of the studies, the fluoride was natural fluoride in their well water, In some cases, the fluoride was coming from coal burning, but over 20 were from water, fluoride from the water. These included 25 studies from China and 2 from Iran. And their study was published in Environmental Health Perspectives, which is one of the leading environmental health journals in the United States and possibly the world. Now, the Harvard team acknowledged that there were many weaknesses in these studies, that they felt they needed more information, not enough information about potential confounding variables. Everybody has acknowledged that. However, they stressed that the results were remarkably consistent. Even though these 27 studies were done over a period of 21 years, done in 2 different countries, in widely dispersed geographical areas in the case of China, and by different research teams, it's remarkable that they found that 26 out of the 27 studies showed a lowered IQ in the high fluoride village compared to the low fluoride village. That's a remarkable consistency. And the average lowering, if you look at the total average of all, was 7 IQ points. And that is very serious. Later on, I shall be explaining why at the population level, a lowering of 5, 6, or 7 IQ points is extremely serious. Now, the fluoridation proponents have argued that the concentrations in these high fluoride villages were not relevant to water fluoridation in the United States. They're wrong. Here are 20 of the studies. Here you can see, I hope you can see, the concentrations. If you take the average, it's 3.52. That is very relevant to the United States because it's actually lower than the so-called safe drinking water standard. The safe drinking water standard in the United States for fluoride is 4 parts per million. So at levels below the so-called safe drinking water standard, we have many studies which are showing a lowering of IQ in these children. And it also, these studies also included Zhang, and I've already told you that as far as relevance to the United States, this is extremely relevant to the United States at the levels that we are using. But there is another issue here, and I've sort of brushed on it,